The views and opinions expressed in the following podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the producers, the affiliates, or digital platforms hosting this podcast. All content is for the purposes of education, conjecture, and at times entertainment. We promote inclusiveness and diversity. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Into the Deep with Jay Costa.
Welcome to Into the Deep. I'm Jay Costa. I am exuberant about today's guest. He's a guitarist, a songwriter, a producer, a singer, and founding member of the band Cynic. He's developed numerous other projects, including Eon Spoke, Onward with Love, as well as a solo project, and a myriad of television and film compositions. Today's guest is Paul Masvidal. Paul and I just started talking right off the rip, and so much so that I just instinctively hit the record button because it just felt so natural and so organic. We start out by where Paul's at, surrounded by all this great art, and it starts out with this painting that a very good friend of his made in a very Vermeer style. And what you don't hear on the recording is that painting behind him is a painting that his father brought home from Puerto Rico of where he was born, the same building, the same street. These are the conversations I live for. And I'm tingling right now just thinking about Paul and I's conversation and how I resonate with him on so many levels. So join me as we seek light and journey into the deep with Paul Masvidal. Enjoy.
Yeah, it's my friend Richard Kilroy who does this type of work, and he just, I still have the note, from when he did it to me and stuff, but yeah, it's like kind of insane. This type of, it's encouraging to know that there's painters out there that still are kind of like keeping it traditional, and you know what I mean, like have the cool techniques and study traditional painting and oils and stuff, and so it's really kind of rad. And that's funny, I'll give you another background. This piece, these two guys, which are like two jaguar heads, are I got these when I was doing one of those tours. What's the metal boat tour, like
70,000 tons? Yeah. Okay.
So we did one where we played a Death to All set, and Cynic played as well. And it was, and one of the stops, I guess, on that particular tour, that cruise ride was like some part of Mexico. And I saw these like kind of panther jaguar heads, which really spoke to me because they reference a lot of it's like kind of the animal in the ayahuasca world, the jaguar and stuff that's known in the Amazon and stuff. So I was like, these are fucking cool. They're hand carved, and yeah. So we got some interesting kind of history here that's kind of very personal,
I love that. It just carries so much great energy with it too. And I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is awesome. Thank you for that mini tour. That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of different. So I'm glad we're kind of, might as well just leave this rather than my typical kind of spacey background. I have this Venosa wallpaper that I use. But I think this is cool. Where are you at?
I'm in Massachusetts.
I heard a kind of Mass Boston-y accent going on there.
Right on. Yeah, I'm originally from Rhode Island, but currently living in Massachusetts. And
yeah. Rhode Island is considered New England, right? I mean, it's proper New England, so yeah.
Yeah, it's been great. My whole life, done some traveling, and so it's been wonderful. So now right now currently residing in Massachusetts, so it's not so bad.
Cool. That's nice. Yeah.
Oh, this is great. I'm so glad. And this is like exactly the pace of like what we do or what I do on the podcast, just conversational and just super relaxed. And
Cool.
talk about things, and I love it. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course. No, I'm happy to have a conversation with you, and it's always interesting to kind of do things outside the box, and
Yes,
typical things that a lot of people it can get very repetitious and redundant. So it's nice to kind of leave those traditional promotional formalities and do things that are less common.
I agree. That's kind of the catalyst behind, why I do this. I just love it. And, exploration and consciousness and just expression and all of it is just so meaningful. So,
Nice. You've
well,
been in the path for a bit. You've been doing the sitting practices and
I try to stay on top of myself as much as I can. I do work a regular job, and then I do this on the side, also music and art and things like that. But this has been for me, it's been a great escape, so to speak. Not escape, but I guess something to channel energy into. My mom had passed away about a year and a half ago, and so this has been kind of very cathartic for me to be able to talk with people and let people share stories, and like in a time that I feel like everyone's so polarized, and if we just focused on our commonalities, that we could just bring people together. And that was something my mother really instilled within me. So I feel like I'm really doing that now with having the podcast and talking with people.
that's really beautiful. I'm sorry about your mother. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. And, I still think of it as, her energy is always with me. She's always here. She's left me with so much. So it'll just, traverse the multiverse and keep going through her actions, through my actions, and so on and so forth into the world. So
Yeah, I think that's a good, healthy reminder that the people we lose, in this realm, oftentimes we can embody their energy. It kind of comes through us in a different way, and the relationship still is intact. It's just taking on a different form, right? We can still communicate with them and have dialogue and maintain that kind of connection, but it's shifting. And the tricky part is kind of identifying with them now in this other way, because we're so used to the physical representation. But obviously your mom was beyond a body. She was a spirit, right? And inhabiting a body. So it's kind of like, okay, how do I connect with them in that space? And it's this attachment stuff that keeps we're so used to the form and the attachment, and having gone through the loss of my two mates really in 2020, and having lost a lot of other people. I went through a whole period of grieving, which I haven't experienced, actually, to come to think of it, um, lately, which was the first really year or so was like a phantom limb thing, where I felt like literally a part of my body was missing, because I had so identified and forged my identity with these guys from a young age, especially Reiner, that it was like, whoa, like I felt like part of me was not there, and it was like, oh wait, like, and so it's trying to like get familiar with that, like, because I didn't realize how connected energetically we were beyond form, so there is that kind of like moving forward and honoring their legacy. I mean, the mothers, that's huge, especially if we were close to our mothers. I mean, that's and kind of honoring who they were and embodying their energy, and kind of it's so beautiful that you're carrying on with this, and kind of the birth of this came out of that. That's a powerful place to birth an idea.
thank you. I feel that deep within me, and I feel like in her own way, somehow, in some way, there's still communication that happens, whether it's through dreams or through different experiences that I've had. It's almost like these like breadcrumbs that have like led me to doing this now. And I'm just so grateful for it. If we're just open to it.
How cool.
Yeah.
Your siblings as well, or
I'm so sorry.
You have siblings? You got?
I do. Yeah, I have an older brother. And he and my father, we're all taking it, difficult, in a difficult way. But he's also creative, but more mechanically inclined. I was the musician and kept going with the music, and he does music, but then I'm more of the, emotive one, so we talk with each other about these things and how we're feeling, and I put myself, into therapy just so I could, process some of this stuff and talk about it, sit with it, and really just try to make sense, like navigating life without, my best friend, someone who I could bounce things off of all the time, anytime. So, that's an adjustment in and of itself. So but I feel her right with me, with everything that I do. So,
Yeah, yeah. There's that saying. I don't know. I'm not going to quote it right, but that a lot of the grief is just the love that you had for them. That's kind of trying to find its way. It's really it's an expression of how much love was there. So yeah, and I don't know that there's any preparation we can do for the loss of our mothers.
mm,
there's no like, if we can think we can do all these practices and think we can, it's its own journey. And I still have mine, but I know, having some dear friends who've lost theirs, it's just you can sense. It's just that's the one you can't even, you can never practice or be prepared for it. Just yeah.
and I think you're right too, with, no matter how much you practice, how much you try to practice that non-attachment, it's, in this physical carbon form, like we're just so used to like that physical form. And I guess in a way it's transformative from my spiritual journey, from my, learning from that. And like, what are these lessons? I'm trying to look at it as a mirror, so to speak. What's in this for me to learn from?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, and like at some point we have to like go beyond intellectualizing it, and just, it's like the experiential aspect of that whole dynamic too is so deep and so rich, and it can't be forced. It's like you have to just go through it. You have to walk the path, and there's no way to kind of shortcut that or find a solution for. It's like, my tendency as a kid, especially coming from a home that was a lot of a lot of confusion and divorces and kind of relational problems between the parental figures, not really so much with me with them, but just what they were going through, and then remarriages and divorces. And so a lot of instability. And my tendency as a thinker and a kind of kid that was put in therapy at a young age, because my mother was so disoriented by this, I had this tendency to go inward and not kind of, I didn't act out outwardly, other than what she's found out was that I was in the playground as a child. I was not participating with the kids at recess and stuff. I was literally just sitting under a tree at like 5, 6 years old, like, we're talking first grade, second grade. And like, just like, I wouldn't play. I wouldn't play with the kids. And there was the kids trying to encourage me, and I was just internalizing all of the stuff as an empathetic being. Like I was just taking on, I think like kids do that are hypersensitive, the sponge of their suffering, their ancestral trauma that they were carrying on from their families, and acting out. So that as this little creative kid, I just like embodied it and went like this. And my mom was so confused because I didn't communicate, that she put me in therapy. And my joke is always, I was raised by therapists, because I started at about 5 years old, and had different experiences with therapists. A classic betrayal experience, like where they went to my parents and said things that I felt like I had the therapist trust. And that's when I started to realize it's all about trust in terms of therapy to patient relationship, because the more you trust them, the more you can open, and have a space where you can be heard. And because they're just directing a process. They're not providing answers. Although some are more, instructive than others, and some are more proactive, which can be awesome. But yeah, it was really a hell of a journey, kind of. And I'm so grateful, because one of the later ones I had, kind of by high school, was Jungian, and got into like dream analysis. And I was deep into dreams and like writing them down and doing this whole dream kind of affirmation before bed at night. And like I would have lucid dreaming, and I started to get into that practice in the astral projection. It was just like into dream work. And so here I've got this therapist who I'm like running off my dreams to, and they're like breaking them down in this incredibly profound way that I didn't even know about the Jungian stuff. And it was like blew my mind open. But it was that moment where I started to realize that I had to learn how to essentially become my own therapist, right? And to learn how to work with my mind, and that I had to take responsibility for what was happening here. I couldn't blame my parents anymore. I had to see them as humans that did the best they could. And that was like such a moment of grace and maturity, like an aha moment where you start to see your parents as people, and you're like, holy shit, they were just doing the fucking working with what they had. And to kind of and it's really empowering place too for a child, because it was like, wait, oh fuck, this is my journey. I gotta sort this out. I gotta find my way through this fucking maze I've incarnated into and try and make sense of all this shit, and like meaning and purpose, and not blaming. And do you know what I mean? It was so rich. And to have those lessons early on, it was game changing. So it's, yeah. I mean, did you have anything like that? Like early mentors, kind of people that?
Luckily, yeah, I did. My mother was great at that. She was always receptive to how much I would internalize things. I would be upset if other people were upset. I'd be, it would upset me if I saw any kind of like violent stuff going on, and even at a young age, just my connection with like animals, I just had this like weird, like not weird, but like for a kid, I had a lot of peers that didn't think much of just like hurting ants and like hurting insects. And I remember at a young age, just not being okay with that. Wow. And my parents just being, very encouraging of that behavior. They never made me feel that I shouldn't be myself. So that I'm always grateful for. And I had a teacher in art that really helped me just kind of be okay with how I perceived or how I was perceiving the world, because it was so confusing for me as an adolescent. Full disclosure, it was like I didn't really understand some of my peers' perspectives on things. I found it challenging to be able to express myself in the way that I knew I felt a certain way, and I didn't know how to get it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you remember the teacher's name? The art?
Yeah. So I had a few actually in particular. So the first one was Mr. Marks. Then I had, after him, it was Mr. Purdy, who is now an English teacher. He was the other one who opened up, got me to open up. And I remember one of the last times I saw Mr. Purdy, my band was playing a show, and he came with his daughter, and I never realized he'd be there. It was like a few years after I had graduated, and it was the last time I got to see him. He has since passed on. And I remember thanking him that night for all that he had done, because he encouraged me to just be open and be myself, regardless of, not feeling like I fit in with a lot of my peers. So I'm glad I got that moment with him.
That's really special. Yeah. Yeah, I was asking if you remembered their name, because I remembered the name. You kind of brought this up for me, of a teacher in high school, who was an English teacher. Her name was Mrs. Adams. I would imagine she's passed by now too. I remember kind of checking in with her maybe by my mid-20s or something, but then there was no contact again. And she was the lady who I was bringing like my lyrics to, like show her songs I was working on. And at the time I was, it's that angst of the teens, and I was very kind of political and, system and I'll never forget her like looking at me like straight in the eye one day and reading, just saying, these are really good and I love this, and would give me these encouraging feedback. And then one day she goes, one day you're going to be writing about love.
Mm.
And you're going to stop the war with the world and realize the war you're waging is a war that's within yourself. And that it was like this profound, like epic kind of thing that I didn't get at the time. I just thought it was so sweet that she kind of saw that, and because it was almost like, what, like it was like, no, the world's wretched and I'm going to fight this place. And it's I still have those, moments where it's like I can see through the dance. You see the dance of aliveness, the whole game of separation, the reality of this existence we live in, this realm where things are just inherently gnarly and dysfunctional. And at the same time, it's to not argue with it, to realize it's part of the whole thing unfolding, that it's exactly what it needs to be. So it's not about like turning the other cheek and accepting, because we always have to kind of we have to kind of do our best to kind of raise the way that we're interacting with this reality in a way that feels more wholesome and conscious, and has more integrity, but at the same time, like fully accepting it too. It's a weird paradoxical environment where you have to just like embrace it, right? And just like, what's her name? Who I love. She wrote, Who Would You Be Without Your Story? She's one of her sayings, and I always quote it, is like, like, if you argue with reality, you never win, right? It's like you're like fighting something that doesn't. It's again about accepting things as they are, but also like you do what you do to change within yourself, to change what's happening externally, rather than like, fighting it, the external kind of representation of it. It's almost like if you can shift that thing, that shadow that you're at war with, that's represented in you externally, because it's all a mirror. We're all one thing, kind of mirroring each other's stuff. If we can kind of transform that within ourselves, then it starts to shift externally, right? It's this, and it's really, it takes a lot to kind of get to where you really get that, and where it starts to shift. And it's the hardest work. It's not, and it sounds like cliche stuff these days, because you see so many hashtags with this type of these words, and you know what I mean? These kind of patch phrases in the spiritual 101 world, but it always goes back to all that stuff. It's always so simple, you can't burn those cliches out there. Who was I talking about this the other day? It was like, because I have an older brother who's a yogi and a major yoga dude, and we get in these discussions all the time because he's so about the roots of pure yoga, and like purist yoga. And so he'll see a lot of these yoga studios popping up all over the country, and he's like, they're not teaching yoga, it's exercise. That's an exercise studio. And I get what he's saying, because the roots of Hatha yoga was to strengthen your spine so that you could sit longer. It was just for your meditation practice. It's just literally there to kind of get you to a place where you can meditate for longer hours. And obviously there's all those branches of yoga, but, I would respond to him with things like, hey, dude, like, let it be cheapened. It's an entry point for something incredibly profound, right? And in the same way that the peace sign, is like, people in the hippies in the 60s were like, oh, it's lost its meaning. It's gotten, people that don't really believe in peace are doing this. And it's like, let it be cheapened, man. Like, whatever way we can bring more ease to this fucking crazy place we're in, where we're still murdering each other and are still a warring people. I mean, we're still fucking my land, your land, I'm going to kill you. I mean, it's incredible that we're still in this place. You know what I mean? We're still we're still cavemen. It's just more sophisticated now. With now, it's like, it's crazy. It's almost, I mean, we're still bombing, obviously, look at Ukraine stuff, but it's like, it's almost more now become more technology based. It's, the war is like with hacking and fucking, right? It's so trippy, and it'll keep evolving, but it's still the same idea. It's still the two dudes arguing on the street, it's just like that metaphor still applies. It's kind of just manifests in different ways, right?
So true. And it's like that level of barbarism that continues and perpetuates. And it just, like you said, it finds new forms, but it's just, and I mean, you can trace it back to greed and ego, of just like,
oh yeah. Yeah. And it's mostly men.
Yeah.
Historically, it's like there's been some powerful queens, I guess, and figures with women, but in general, women don't have that aggression built into them that the men do. It's like, it's weird, and I don't want to break it, get into a gender thing, but it is like, if you get into the male female general dynamic, I mean, women tend to be more empathic. They're like the feminine aspects of the psyche. It's more empathic, it's more open, it's more heart-based, it's, and I mean, look at even when we were kids in school, it's like the girls were cool with just like holding hands and sitting, talking to each other, and we had to like be tough and not supposed to cry or whatever the case, Mm-hmm. I think that's changing and evolving a little bit and getting better as well as parents. But there's still, it's still going on. Their work is like, and at least in our lifetime, I feel like there's not enough we can do. It's just an uphill battle that we're going to keep fighting, but this is what we're here to do, man. Right?
I love that. Yeah, and I love the point you brought up earlier, like, let it be cheapened. If it's an entry point, if it's a way for someone to discover.
It's a little seed, man, and it's, who knows? Like, I mean, I even think about this. I was telling this to like my manager recently, like in a conversation, we were sitting down and I said, I was in Mexico for a couple months this past year, and I was hanging out at this little beach town off the Oaxacan coast between Mazunte and Zipolite. And I was getting these little guys wrapped, these little organite pieces. I was getting them wrapped with these macrame workers. There's these little local artists there that do beautiful macrame work. And I had these kind of made, kind of cuff bracelets.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah, I was just bringing the little organ pieces, and they were doing the wraps. And I was hanging out with some dear friends and brothers in this kind of hippie towns, just really, like, one's nudist kind of like vibe, and the other one's just like yogis and a lot of retreatants and stuff. And I was telling them this story, how one of these days I was literally walking in this little town, tiny little village off the coast of Mexico, right? The west coast, like Oaxacan coast south, like near kind of Guatemalan border. And I literally, some dude like passes me on a moped and like just like stops his moped and gets off, and he goes, "Pa Masvidal?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, my name is Marco, da 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 da." And he was this Italian dude who's like a yogi, and he said this to me, and we became friends since, and I kept in touch with him and hung out with him and his wife. But he told me that it was a poem from Focus, and, like, from Sentiment, like that I had, gotten permission to use from Self-Realization Fellowship. He was like, that whole, the spiritual message in Cynic put me on the path. And now I'm a full-time yogi, and I have this whole school. And he's like one of the biggest names in that part of region of Mexico and Italy. He has 2 schools and this really cool program, and he's transforming lives. And I was like, I almost started crying. You know what I mean? Like, dude. But it reminds me, it's that entry point. All it took was that little thing. And a lot of like Vedic view would say, oh, that's the karmic thing. It's the trigger that they had it in them already. They just needed that one thing to kind of open it up. You know, there's a story of like, I think even maybe it's told with Christ being a carpenter, but like I remember hearing about some teacher, Advaita teacher, non-dualism teacher, who like literally had no background in the spiritual path and was fucking hammering a nail into a wall as a carpenter, and bam, had a full fucking kundalini opening, saw everything, had full download of all the information, tries to process it, and then next thing you know, he's a fucking teacher. It makes me think of like Eckhart Tolle, you know, fucking homeless, you know. And it's an interesting line where they you know, these people straddle, because when you have that moment of recognition and awareness, it's almost like in that annihilation of the ego, the practical nature of working with reality. It's like there's people on these streets where I am in Los Angeles and major cities that are like had those blowouts but didn't know how to integrate. And it's that fine line of like enlightenment but also like craziness, like, because you can't, you know what I mean? And that happens a lot where people, it's like a blast. Maybe it goes into the direction of a mental illness thing because they don't know how to integrate. And I think that's what's beautiful with a lot of the shamanic cultures is how they treat that. You know what I mean? They kind of work with them in these collective intelligence ways of healing trauma and or that degree of awareness and seeing it as maybe a gift rather than some illness. And so it's so deep. I mean, I'm just scratching the surface of I don't even know. I'm going into all these like, but again, I can't remember what our point was. Yeah, it's the entry point, you know, the entry point, the hammer, the nail in the wall, the poem in a song, you know, the lyrics. It's the peace sign, the yoga class,
Right.
whatever it takes to have us take a look a little deeper into what the hell we're doing here, what's going on, you know, to look at our minds.
Mm-hmm. And that's really, and that's what, you know, with art, with music, you know, all forms of expression, you know. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's like these seeds you've been planting these seeds of consciousness. You know, you've been making conscious art and music for quite some time. And I don't know, like, was it ever frustrating that like you were hopeful that maybe someone would catch on or it would resonate with some people, or maybe could it be?
Yeah, dude, I'll never forget, you know, like soul crushing reviews of Focus back in the day of like, who the fuck does this guy think he is fucking writing lyrics like this? And like, this is cheesy or putting it down. And I was like thinking, man, those were some of my most vulnerable moments. And I'm being dissed because the metal scene was so hard and so tough. And it's like, who's this? You know, what is, you know, it's just like heart wrenching for me because I felt like I was really putting myself out there. And here I'm but then I realized it's taken years to kind of come around and realize this is the risk you take with anything where you try and reveal yourself in a vulnerable way, because you're kind of really referencing and mirroring the other's own shadow, their own, like whatever. We can't attack someone else's faults unless we have them within ourselves. It's like we have to be able to see them within to even point the finger at somebody else. It's like that's some unclaimed inner work right there, dude. Careful what you say.
Mm-hmm.
The power of those words, because it's really our stuff all the time, right? With all of our. So, but it's taken me a while to get around to that because I, of course, the bruised, you know, ego personality, Paul, was like, oh, fuck. Oh, maybe he's right. Maybe it is. I'm trying too hard to say something. And, you can't help but like the insecure artist go,
Sure.
oh, fuck, what am I doing? Like, and so it's like second guessing, so there's so many layers to kind of get to the point where you have to just, and I don't, it's a fine line because there's a lot of people who say you just have to not care. Don't give a fuck because no one else gives a fuck. And it's like, no, I don't want to get to where it feels like it's a fine line with that because that could come off as jaded. Do you know what I mean? It's like indifferent.
Right.
And the whole way that you can come from writing from that place is being not jaded. It's being still the child that can be really pure and in touch with something that feels really earnest and beautiful and not intellectually jaded. Because there was even a moment where I was really careful, like using the word love. I mean, I remember those high school days. I was like, the word love in my lyrics? Are you kidding me? Like too intellectually kind of corrupted to open myself. But I realized, man, if you can use that word, if you can approach those things from a place of genuine, that's like that's true power. Like that's fucking way beyond thinking you're too cool for school to use the word or too smart, or because there's all those intellectual variants of pop artists that were put that down too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So man, I don't know that there's a right way. We're just all doing what we can. And for me, it has been an onion, healing process of getting more and more comfortable with just trying to tell the truth in my own, and it's not to say my version of the truth, but because truth is universal, but that's the point. I think when you get to the point of universal truth, that's when it really resonates and echoes in everybody, because we all meet there. But it's the hardest thing in the world to kind of capture that, especially lyric writing. I found like words, and writing, which I'm so fascinated with, and most of my dearest friends are writers, and it's like I really connect with writers, and their whole thing is using words to kind of convey ideas, and such a powerful medium. I mean, it's really the medium in which we're all trying to get things across, right? So it's and lyric writing, fuck man, it's sometimes it's easy in terms of things just come through and it's like bam, oh, there's the idea. But most of the time it's like really an excavation of just like, wow, what am I getting at? And I showed a picture to a friend of mine who helps me with some website stuff recently of this Eon Spoke like Sephiroth thing that I did of like the Tree of Life.
Yeah.
The notes of it, like all my notes and like the original sketches and drawings. It was so fucking amazed, that was so packed and layered. And I like said to him, I said something to him like, I was like, I can't believe the shit I put myself through to get to what I was trying to say. And he's like, and only you would care so much to do that. Like, it was like, but it was like, I was like, I know it's straddling that line of like insanity, where it's like, because it's not practical at all. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to distill it to like an artistic expression. And that's where some of the most profound happens. It's so simple, yet it has this insane profundity that isn't visible. You know what I mean? It's on the surface, it just looks so simple. It's just like, oh, that's just so beautiful. But little do you know, there's this whole fucking thing underneath. So I'm always finding it's like a subtraction process, right? You're just trying to subtract and subtract. And what's hilarious with Cynic is you would think it's the opposite, because it's so layered and intense. The work, thinking about ascension codes, and we're talking about potentially releasing the record as an instrumental mix, and it's like, it is so melodically driven. But I did this playthrough recently that's coming out in September of one of the songs, Aurora, and did it instrumental, and it's like, holy shit, this song works without vocals, as a complete guitar dense, like it's a guitar song, you know, and it's a band song, but it's just packed with fucking shit. And I was thinking like, wow, like that that's okay. I guess it's okay. That record has become another super dense thing that is not distilled. It's packed. Although the segues like that, you know, my brother, he goes by the name Dark, Rupam did, are so, they're almost like palate cleansers because they're dense, fucking packed information layers, just, and then palate cleanse, you know, harmonics and space, and then back into the journey of, you know. But I mean, yeah, it's like all the melodies, everything. Like it's like I'm thinking, man. And in some ways, the vocals were treated as another instrument. They're not really in your face, so they're just like part of the mix of the tapestry, you know. But it makes for records that are harder to ingest, you know. And this is coming back to Focus, which is the 30th anniversary next year. It's like you know, telling this to Matt Lynch, my drummer who was staying with me last night. I was like, these records have their own timeline. You know, it took 12, 13 years for people to get Focus, really. And like, I feel like we're not part of like any pop culture, like movement, or, you know, like it's as much as it is of the times, it's also not. And like, just it finds itself, it does its own thing. It's not in competition with the times. It just put it out there and let it do its thing, and just have patience with it. I mean, there's always that sense of urgency, and of course the record company wants their money back.
Right.
So they're just like urgent, 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 but we're just like, yeah, I guess that's not where this music comes from. It's not that kind of music. It's not. But it's cool when it resonates with the times, and that's the beauty of sometimes when art does that, when it kind of you have a moment where you break through and there's a collective kind of, that's kind of amazing. If with profound art, you know, like a real, because that's really kind of like, it makes me think where Pink Floyd, big in their time, I think they didn't break through till like, was it The Wall that was their big breakthrough? Because I think even The Wall started out as like a art project kind of thing with the film, and then it had a later, but that was maybe their moment, actually. Was it? I don't know. I don't know the story of Pink Floyd in that sense, but I think that was when they kind of reached the kind of pop culture collective masses, right? Was it The Wall? Because they had all those weird proggy fucking psychedelics.
Yes, which are great.
Great.
Yeah, Wall and like Dark Side were like that kind of like, you know, the right time, right place. And, you know, again, I think, I guess the question is it taking the collective consciousness to catch up?
Right.
You know? Is that, you know, because that's how, you know, you brought up the Unspoke record, that, you know, like it's, you know, were you into Kabbalah before?
Yeah.
Or, you know, and like that, and that was the inspiration?
Yeah, and Unspoke played shows at Kabbalah Center in LA and London. We had this beautiful show in London, man. It was like this magical evening. And so I was deep into the mysticism of Kabbalah, and I still am. I'm fascinated. I think I first got turned on to it from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, that book, which, you know, Manly P. Hall. And I just saw these crazy diagrams of Sephiroth and fucking all these writings, and how it merged with all the other great teachings, and what it pointed to. And it was like, fuck, this is so cool, you know. And I just love the complexity of the diagram and the tree of life, and how it represents the body and all these, you know what I mean? It's so profound. Yeah. And it's totally connected to all the universal truths. So yeah, that kind of became the symbology of Eon Spoke's art stuff. And And in the reissue kind of thing that's going to come out, like the physicals of it, which we're working on now, it's like I've been almost finally now where I can distill it. I'm reducing it. I'm pulling it back just to the symbol. And I'm thinking I don't have to over articulate all these things that I was really trying to connect the dots with, like I Ching and fucking astrology. And I was trying to merge all of that into this crazy maze and numerology. And now I'm like, I don't have to do all that. Like, you can just have the song title, the color, and a symbol, and that's enough. I mean, it took fucking 20 years to get to that where I'm like, I guess, has it been 20? Yeah, it's been almost fucking 20 years. It's insane.
Wow.
Because Focus is having its 30th, which is crazy next year. But yeah, Eon Spoke, I think that record, we self-released it in like 01, and then 04 was it when SPV put it out. But yeah, it's been almost 20 years. God, wow. The passage of time, another weird thing that we're
right.
You know, it's like, what is this thing? It speeds up, it slows down, it's like, it's different for everybody. We're all having different versions of how we experience it. It's fascinating, you know.
Right. And just and how it correlates to music and art and like the impact it has on measure and meter and everything else. It's like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, like, you know who was really killer about that, and I think drummers in general should be, because they're like all about the math. Really, they're keeping time, right? And but Reiner, you know, he was like just the numbers thing, and he really just had this innate understanding of how things broke down. He understood it in his body, and he could kind of articulate that in a really interesting way. And I guess it kind of got expressed as a drummer, just like he kind of became this embodiment of, because it was just like anything that I couldn't intellectualize, but I knew in my body, he could just immediately express it. Like, oh yeah, this is, you know, 7 against 4 or whatever, like these like polyrhythmic things and stuff. He would just immediately know how to kind of show you how it worked, you know, the right hand, the left hand. And it was like, wow, that's so cool. You know? But that's a drummer's job, is to kind of capture it in their body and express it, you know, as a like a, I guess as a rhythm. It's so, it's in nature, it's everywhere, you know, it's in speech patterns. It's like,
It's fascinating how it all is so interconnected. And to your point earlier, like how it's different, you know, time is different for everyone, our perception of it. Yet here in this moment or this time where you're writing music and you're this conduit and you're expressing it through notes, and then here's this rhythm and this beat, and it's just coming together, and it's just such a magic that
yeah.
is just transforming the world around us. At least that's how I feel and see it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you just show up for a process. And I think that's also the mysterious aspect of the kind of music, you know, Cynic has always made. And really, I've approached it, I think, since a young age, as though, although I got into intellectualizing music, kind of studying classical guitar as a kid, and then the jazz stuff and chords and harmony, and like really intellectualizing this stuff, I always had that thread of connection to like the raw kid that didn't know what he was doing thing. And I think that was where I got lucky, in that I got to finesse that line of like having this progressive element of the music, but never swallowing how it felt. It was always coming from this empathic, like beginner mind state that didn't overly intellectualize what was happening, and trusted in the unorthodox and the humility in which you had to meet this stuff. Like, you don't quite, because you can get, you know, especially in progressive music, it can get sterilized, right? It gets overly proggy, too heady, too mathy. and it almost like the soul gets gutted out of it. It's now you're just in thinking head. It's like, ooh, which is kind of cool and exciting and fun sometimes. But I mean, I would say even a band like Yes would touch into like, as profound and deep as their stuff was on all levels, they also sometimes got so nerdy and heady. You know what I mean? It was like super intellectual, right? But it is, I guess it's the dance of kind of straddling all those lines. But I feel like I always felt like I never was good enough. Like I always felt like I was never, and I'm just being really honest. Like I never felt like that guitar player that was like the chops for days and could do everything. And I mean, I found my own weird form of this pocket of this thing and this way to express it, and it became this sound, and then it kind of just like turned into something. But it was never like where I felt like, yeah, I'm this sick guitar player that's got fucking, because there's, I mean, especially these days, go on YouTube, there's like fucking 8-year-olds in Japan shredding. It's like it's kind of always been that. I think maybe now we're just they're learning quicker because they have YouTube, and it's like, so if you have that ripe mind at a young age and you have YouTube at your disposal, it's like the whole encyclopedia is in front of you, and you can just. So they're accelerating. It's more advanced at a young age. I mean, that's what it seems to be, because it's ridiculous. The skills out there now. It's kind of standard has gotten so high, right? In metal, too. It's
100%. You're right. That bar has been just, just when you think it's pretty high, like you said, you turn on, it's like a TikTok video of like an 8-year-old, like sweep picking these arpeggios, and they're like, having snacks, and they're just chilling. Like, what? You got goldfish. They're just, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think it's like, that's the trick for those kinds of artists and musicians, because some of them have such finesse and ease at such a young age, is to cultivate the expression where they have something to say. And because, technique means nothing if you don't have anything to say, but you can say a lot without technique, and like, that's the bottom line, is that the expression of the creativity is way more important and always trumps the technique itself. And it's really just a tool to have more vocabulary. Like Keith Jarrett would say that he's like, I just practice all this technique stuff so that I can have at my disposal when I'm improvising as much as possible, so he could just, whatever is coming through, he can access it. That's the only reason why he wanted to have technique. And I was like, wow, that's such a profound way to say why you're doing this, because you just want to have the whole range of the vocabulary at your disposal to just access whatever it is you're transmitting without any limitation. And that dude was such a boss, sick, like, player, that he got to make, have these moments in history as a pianist, like Cone Concert and stuff like that are just like historical documents of like pure improvisation that are so or like a Charlie Parker or a John Coltrane. I mean, or Holdsworth, even, like, analyzing what's going on. It's just like, they weren't thinking, man, but but they did a lot of thinking to get to that point where they were freed of the thinking, right? And that's a lot of the Zen koans, it's like the riddle. You have to like break through the fucking, that's riddle to see through. And it's a lot of just staring at a wall until the wall. There's a lot of those stories. There was a book called 3 Pillars of Zen that one of my early guitar teachers turned me on to. And it's stories of Westerners, like in the 60s and 70s, I think, that went to this guy, Suzuki Roshi, some Zen teacher that was in San Francisco, and then ended up back in Japan, a lot of these like school teachers and lay people from the West were going to his ashram to just wake up. And a lot of the stories, these people that have these moments where they have this awakening, they just burst out into laughter. They just start giggling, and it's like you start realizing like it's the cosmic joke where you see through, you're taking it so seriously, this whole thing. It's like, wait, no, it's not that serious. Like, and we've been doing this and punching ourselves, being so hard on ourselves. So it's beautiful to kind of read about those moments. And a lot of us have them in abbreviated versions of it on psychedelics, where you're just like, oh my God, the giggles on mushrooms, or, I mean, it's
those little moments.
Yeah, you touch it,
And it makes me just think about how, we're obviously a lot of old texts, we're trying to describe some of these things, how to tap into this, this consciousness and this energy that is all around us at all times, within us, part of us, everything, and how, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, some of these conversations that folks are now having just in regular everyday conversations at a cafe wouldn't be having 10, 20 years ago. And now folks are a lot more open to things, folks are now okay with talking about, extraterrestrial contact. Like, it took long enough.
Yeah, we had to break through the whole taboo thing that Hollywood built up. And there's still that element, man. There's still a taboo thing. There's still a lot of people that just have weird, like, they think it's if you're talking about it, you're a crazy person. Still, there's still people that believe that, that are still kind of brainwashed. Those same people that think that, LSD is going to fry your brain. It's like it's this programming that's happened culturally. But you're right, we've come a long way because those conversations are happening more and more. And it's taken the technology, this is for better or worse, has been part of the vehicle for that. It's podcasts and the accessibility of all this information has created this playground for all of us to kind of collectively. So that's why I think especially a lot of younger people, they're in some ways, some would argue they're being robbed of their childhoods because they don't have that protection anymore, the filter. But in some ways, they're also accelerating in a different way. Their consciousness, they're maturing. You have to kind of trust that this is coming in as it needs to. It's part of, but we have a lot of people. It's a delicate space, right? The AI discussion and
right,
that's going, and I don't think there's any stopping this train, though. Dude, it's gonna be the Wild West for a while, and we're just gonna have to make mistakes and learn, and who knows, maybe we'll become cyborgs. I mean, maybe, I've heard in weird, cultures, like, a lot of my underground scenes like that, we've already started chipping kids, like they're putting.
Whoa.
Yeah, maybe it's already happening. Maybe there are reptilians in the government. I don't. It's like there's a lot of layers to this. It gets deep.
Yeah.
And I'm always like touching it. It's like, when we start to think we understand reality, and we start to kind of put it in this box, and it's like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Start to like get too sciencey about it, and it's like, no, careful, because it is actually really scientific, and because of that, it's mind-blowingly infinite and expansive. It's like the true nature of this, the science of it is so profound. I feel like quantum physics is starting to open that conversation in the science, the more conservative science circles. Like the reality of us being cellular and atoms, and built of like that, we're not actually solid, and because the yogis have been saying this forever. we have to, the Western mind has to approach it with the science stuff. So
Again, that's that putting it in the box so we can
put it in the box. Yeah.
I need to put it in a box so I can understand it.
Yeah.
And and it's so fascinating.
And art, I mean, they were trying to put cynic in a box forever, and it was like, wait, maybe we don't fit in. We don't fit in. We're not part of anyone's box. Like and that's okay. Like, stop trying to put us in a box. But this is the categorizing, the way that our minds work. It's a way of trying to understand it, maybe to control it or something. Like, put it in the system. The manuals. Like, we have to explain everything very. But what's fascinating is there's volumes and volumes of texts in a lot of these monasteries that break down how the mind works. And a lot of those ancient Tibetan monasteries, they're fucking breaking that shit down, the layers and layers of mind. And it's so scientific, But the way that they got there maybe wasn't the traditional Western model of how we think we're supposed to get there. It came from some more ancient knowing, maybe a more ancient civilization, like that they're connected to, that is part of our past as well, right?
Right. And that's another fascinating topic of just like, unlocking parts of our DNA and, what the what's and the whys and the,
So deep.
I love it.
Well, dude, it's like, it's funny because I love how we're having this conversation, because this is really all I'm interested in talking about. I mean, really, it's like, I just want to get into this stuff with everybody,
Yes.
I mean, and like, how are you,
Yeah.
Like, are you okay? What's going on in your life, Because there's always that we have to we're working with our life situation, and sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and that can be overwhelming, and it can, like, I spent many years just enclosed in a very tight space, feeling the weight of what depression was like, very narrow, the walls are closing in and isolating, and yeah. And I can touch it all the time. I'm right there, it's like I've made friends with it. And the grief.
Yeah, that's something it's always there, and it's accepting that it's always with us or around us, and
and it becomes part of our DNA fabric. It's just how we meet it, maybe, and potentially work with it to provide some healing. And I was telling this to Eyal when I did his podcast like a while back, that I had this moment of complete nihilism, when I lost my bandmates. Like, really, it was like the kind of culmination of the 2020 state of the collective world, and all of that as an empathic person absorbing what was going on collectively. Just everyone in a state of trauma, I guess. But the gift of it was they had to kind of retreat inward, because we couldn't, although we were going to the internet, obviously, too. But I had this moment where I thought, and I said this, and I'm going to repeat it. It was like where I suddenly felt like I had permission to be completely at the highest state of abandonment with reality, where I could just let everything go and I didn't care. And it was interesting, the conversations I was having with people at that time. I was just like, the people pleasing person in me, the person that's always trying to make somebody feel comfortable, and it was gone. It was just like I was just in this direct state of just raw, like, and it took losing people to kind of get gutted in that way where I met reality in the most direct way possible. It was just no bullshit. Do you know what I mean? You're just like,
Yep.
here we are, man. Fucking, fucking, you okay? Fucking, because I can barely. But I also, the nihilism, like the self-destructive part of me, like, oh, now I can overdose on drugs and take my own life, or do something really destructive. And I entertain those things. I like entertain this idea of like, maybe this is my way, my way to go, my turn, like, and it was good to touch that, and then I had to get past that. It was realizing like, oh wait, like we're all in this together. We all represent different aspects of each other, and I don't have to I don't have to tell that story in that way. I can meet it in a different way. But yeah, I'm grateful for having a spiritual practice and having meditation in my life and journaling and doing inner work, because I think that really gave me an opportunity to kind of get some perspective on what was going on, rather than totally self-identifying and being swallowed by it as its own little story. The ego, the story of, and just kind of stepping out and getting past that whole aspect that can feel so personal, and it is, but at the same time, it isn't, right? It's so, yeah, it's hard to even get all this into words.
Yeah, because I think some of those, and I can identify a lot of these feelings and these emotions are just like they're firsts, and it's indescribable. Like there is no language in human form or anything that I can think of that could fully express how that grief feels. All I can do is just know that I feel it and what it does to me internally. And so I have that choice what I do with that energy. And that's, I think that's that transmutation, right? That alchemical work of like, let me move this, let me shift this, because I know what it feels like and how it's consuming me, and everything's closing in, and I'm having these dark thoughts. Where's the lesson in this? What can I do with this energy? How can I make things better, or how can I help somebody else? I guess that's kind of where my heart and my mind go.
Yeah, move the energy, because it's stuckness. A lot of it is very stuck, and sometimes it's like, because I think I worked through one breakup, of an intimate relationship with yoga. Like I literally was like pushed myself where I was doing a practice every day, a really kind of aggressive hatha practice, and I like worked through the grief of the loss of the relationship through my body, and it worked. It's like I used, and it got the energy moving again. It was like had to almost be a physical embodiment of just stretching and opening and just kind of getting to a place where I could breathe and take deep breaths. But yeah, it is all those things, like whatever we can do to kind of, or show up for somebody else, like the reference point of like showing up for somebody else who's in hardship, and it's like if we learn how to kind of meet that in ourselves, we can do it for others, right? We can properly show up for others if we know how to walk through that door. And those are the best friends, the ones that have walked through it themselves and can hold space for us when we're walking through it. And yeah, there's nothing like experience as a teacher. That's like, because it's, I went through my 20s thinking I understood how the world works, and I could intellectualize it, right? It was like, and I had some experience from my childhood and everything, but I definitely was still intellectualizing how I understood things and thought I could enter the mind having read enough books. And it was like, no, it took like the Annihilation in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, where just life fucking just gives you everything it's got, man. And then you're just like, wow, okay. The teacher is the experience. It's not. The books can't do it anymore. The books only go so far. Our mind can take us so far with thinking we got a hold of this situation. Eventually just explodes, and that's where the learning, you know what I mean? It's like letting go.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. And we just hold on for dear life. We're holding on to everything. Our white knuckle just.
Oh, dude.
Why?
No, because it's a fight for our life. We believe our very own existence is predicated on this concept of how we've understood how reality works and how we've identified with our experience of reality. So until we can kind of let go of that, it's like it really is a fight for life. For this is the ego's battle. It's the battle of like, it feels like that. It's, you know, and that death, that dying that's where real freedom. That's the freedom. That's where you're finally free. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to, you know, and I shouldn't say I'm trying. I am letting go. You know, it's a moment to moment process of letting go. And some days I'm better at it than others. You know?
I hear that one.
You know what I mean? It's sometimes I'm still bite the hook once in a while, and it's like, but I've got good tools, and you know, working with trauma and stuff, and lifelines and ways to work with it where I can. And I found a lot of it is learning how to regulate the nervous system when you're straddling. I'm going to use first person when I'm straddling those edges. How to get my nervous system to a place of regulation again, where I feel like I'm seeing things clearly rather than caught up in whatever it is that's that energy, that ancestral trauma that's showing up and saying, hey, you know, you're supposed to feel like hell today. You're supposed to be sad. But then again, honoring that, like honoring some days it's okay that I'm going to move at a half speed and maybe cry a lot, and maybe I just need to reach out to some friends and just take care of myself a little and just honor the kid that's in pain and accept that and love it and have some gentleness towards that instead of trying to think it has to change or move. It's be with it, make friends with it. You know, that's where the change happens, is giving it a big old hug.
It's so true. And I've gone through periods of time where I know myself now. You know, I'll be 43 in just a couple of days, and
Ooh, cool.
yeah, and I just
Leo?
I'm sorry.
Leo? Are you Leo?
Virgo.
Oh, Virgo! You're right on the cusp, right?
Yeah. Yep. And it's 27th of August.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm at that point, you know, where I know when I need a good cry. I know it's just like I'm gonna hang out. I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna let it just wash over me. I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna feel so much better. And I truly do. After I do that, it's like, okay, I've got this. This.
Yeah.
And you know, there's those days where I don't necessarily bounce back right away, and it's okay. And I'm more patient with myself now than I used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding like even this idea of like the bounce back. It's like not even trying to bounce back, just hanging out in the complete like falling apartness, and just like it's this, it's again one of these quotes that's well known, but I'm going to say it again. It's a Chug Yang Trumpa quote, and the quote is, "The bad news is you're falling through the air, no parachute. The good news is there's no ground." And the idea is that there never is ground. We're in a free fall the whole time if we're really paying attention. And to just find some ease knowing that all the time, to be in that state of that free fall where we're just, you never quite land, because everything else is almost an attempt to deal with the anxiety of trying to kind of hold on.
Right.
So just to breathe into that free fall, to not try and get a hold of this, to really just let go and find ease in that without the parachute. But there's no ground, so you're just in a free fall. Maybe you're floating, maybe it's a little more buoyant, there's less gravity, over time. But yeah, it's a good place to be, to connect with others in that way, because that's where we really all are all the time. We're paying attention.
I love that. It's so true. It's one of the many things that I love about this, this existence, and like, in those days where you're feeling, or at least for me, in my first person, feeling like, okay, this is good. This is fun. This food tastes wonderful. It tastes amazing. And, and it's nourishing me, and, that interconnectedness to everything. And then when you have those moments to just, be still, and, and I think that's the best. That's just the best part of this life. So, yeah, that free fall. I love that.
Yeah. It's there is something very kind of, I don't know. For me, it puts me at ease knowing that first off, that reminder, and I always use this as an entry point too when I have those old traumas reappear, is I remind myself that a lot of other people are feeling this right now too, and it kind of connects me. It's like a wet point of connection. So it's like, instead of this isolated space that I used to go into, now it's like, oh wait, no, this is what depression feels like. This is what sadness feels like. We're all in on this. We all know this. And so it's a way of like connecting with the collective in a sense. And it gets me out of this me thing aspect. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that's what that person was feeling that day when they were trying to express this to me, or this. It's just like it, this is really the thing. It's like we're trying to just like expand our heart as far open as possible, and realize that there's enough room there. Kind of, it doesn't get full. It actually just keeps expanding, and you can never, there's no ends, there's no boundaries. It's kind of like a universe in itself. It's the metaphor for a universe. So it's this boundless space, but we have to massage it to kind of keep opening it, right? Opening the muscle, getting it to loosen up and hold more space and hold more fucking love, more the root of this whole thing. So beautiful.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that is so.
I feel like your mom thing, you starting the conversation with that, she's like, that's become the whole conversation, right? I mean,
Truthfully,
we're going into the heart now, man. The mother.
Yeah. Yep. It is truly the root of everything. And that's ever since I was a kid, she would always taught me that love was everything. Love is everything. And I'm so grateful for that because I carry that with me every single day. And, you know, I, it, especially in this past year and a half, I think it's impacted me on a deeper level because now I think I try to quantify it before, whereas now I'm just being with it. And I understand it's a state of becoming. It's like a breath. It's not this concrete block. It's breath. It's becoming and it's growing and it's moving. And now I feel like I have a deeper understanding of what she was trying to instill within me and tell me on a deeper level. At least that's
That's
how I
really
feel.
beautiful. Yeah, how we absorb information over time, depending on our own life experience. Like I had books I read as a kid that I didn't get because I was too young, and then reread years later, and it's like, oh, now I get that. Now I get that chapter, or
Right.
it's like depending on, again, we can only meet these things depending on our own experience, and so it's kind of interesting in that way that all the information we're absorbing through a lifetime, and almost like it's integrated in different ways over the passage of our lives, depending on how much further we're opening and able to reflect and right. And so the lessons of even the parent and stuff, often I mean, and I always say the parent, it could be a best friend, it could be somebody, whoever played a role as a mentor, as a figure in one's life, because it's, traditional parents, it could be anything, for everybody. Everybody has a different version of that.
Right.
But because I had people in my childhood that were parental type figures that weren't, that kind of played the role, but they were just one another aspect of it. They held a certain space that maybe my physical parents couldn't, or something. So there's all these. It's like, they say it takes a village, and really, for many of us, it is a village of people that are in our lives that kind of plant different seeds, and
Mm. I love that because then it gives me that sense of almost like we're this walking mosaic of
yeah,
influence and all those seeds that are planted that, they will grow. And
we'll grow, yeah, and they get expressed somehow through whatever we're doing in our life, and through music and work.
mhm.
Interesting how some songs, I've had a lot of songs I have that I've written, that I like, a lot of Cynic records and everything. It's like the songs exist, like they've always kind of existed. They almost get put into this, like, like archival kind of thing. And then when it's time to make a record, they kind of pop up, and it's like the ones that are ready. And it could be something related to something from so long ago that just wasn't fully integrated yet because of where I am now. And then it's like, okay, now this thing is ready to be finished or get completed and turned into a recorded work. Like the demo was just that early seed of, right. And so a lot of the creative process, I found, it's kind of been cyclical, where it kind of has this early origin, and then it might reappear, and then, but the songs themselves tell you when they're ready. It's like you can almost just make room for it, and then it just shows up. It's like, oh yeah, okay, this one, it's time for this one to do its thing. It's fascinating how impersonal that can be, and personal at once. Again, the paradox of this whole thing.
Has there ever been maybe a song that you've written that like you've maybe re-listened to and it's inspired you and given you a whole different feeling and a whole different sense from where you were when you wrote it?
Oh yeah. I'll give you an example. A song from Cynic's Carbon-Based Anatomy, the song "Box Up My Bones." That song, it had this root of an old demo. like was like just me on like acoustic guitar playing this like verse part, and I had this like pre-chorusy thing. I didn't have the chorus, but I had these two main sections that had this really pure essence. And I had that for years before that song. And then the song kind of, Carbon, that album happened in a month. It was one of these things where we were in this pressure cooker environment. And I'll speak for myself. I was actively involved in the ayahuasca community in LA. I still am, but it was really like the early years of it where I was deep in doing a lot of medicine and in ceremony. So I was kind of in this like touching into those spaces, a lot of ego death and those like just a lot of death themes, really. And there was a patient I had who I was working with through this hospice organization, who a unique person in that his name was Chester, that he brought me in. Like we kind of had a soul connection, and he says, "You're going to take this journey with me." And he took me to the end of his life, where I was holding his hand as he took his last breath. And I had these like months with him, a summer basically, where we got to kind of be with each other. And it was so, when I look back at what an honor it was that he pulled me in through that journey. But then it was that was going on, the ayahuasca stuff. And then we were in this like crazy music business legal battle with an ex-manager. It was a fucking mess. And it was so stressful. Sean Reiner and I were living together actually in this house in Echo Park, this neighborhood in LA. And so we had this like container of all this stuff, kind of just like a fucking big pot of like, alchemizing light blue like stuff. It was, and had mud, it had light, it had sparks of heart. It was just like, and this manager, this newer manager we had at the time was like, why don't you just make an EP? Just make a record, make something. And I was like, okay, fucking, because it was like, didn't know what to do with all this stuff that was happening. And I think that was his intuitive awareness, this guy, Andy Karp. I think he really had an insight there to kind of say, put all this energy into your work right now. You're working through a lot of shit. So I did. And in a month, that record just went, and it was like, bam, we like recorded it and it was like done. And it wasn't until years later, looking back, that it was like, wow, look at that weird thing that happened. It was like popped out of a time and place that could never be recreated. And that song in particular, it held so many things, and it kind of embodied, it was like the heart of the record in a sense. And it had this ancient root of the seedling. And then this whole like modern thing about where I was meeting the trauma, meeting the fear, meeting everything I was working through, and how I could push through it. And, the lyric in the chorus of Box My Bones is, when I feel scared, I declare I have everything I need. It's like that knowing that I have everything I need, and it's okay wherever I am, that there isn't something else that's going to replenish or make this better. It's all here, and just accepting where I am, and that sense of surrender, that was like the heart of that record, and that song. And so that's an example of one of those moments for sure.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Oh,
yeah, thanks for asking. You just kind of brought up with something that I never really thought about it in that way, like explaining it. So it's interesting to kind of we're always telling these things over and over in new ways, depending on, right, who we're meeting. And so thank you for holding space as my mirror in this conversation. And I can do the same for you,
Yeah, 100%. This has been wonderful. I've enjoyed every moment of this. So thank you for your time and your space as well too.
Yeah,
it means a lot. You have was it a retreat in Bali coming up that you?
Yeah. So my friend Jay Cobran, he's a painter. I've been in touch with him for many years. He's been he was emailing me back in the day. Like he was kind of when he was really young. Actually, he might have even been in his late teens, but he's like really been deep in the visionary arts path, like Venosa School, Martina, all those artists. Alex Gray, I think he went and did some of Alex's workshops and schools and stuff, and he's really come into his own voice and makes beautiful art, and he's been really good about integrating where art, where the creative path like merges with like, different teachings, really kind of like he took the artist's way. I don't know if you know that book, but he took that as like a program and was teaching it. And I did a guest teaching stuff on it a couple of those times that he did that program with the students. And so now he's organizing like a workshop. He's deep into like magic, and the use of magic and working with the sigils and all this, the symbolism and all the practices and where that intersects with the creative process. And so he's doing this retreat in Bali. It's for 2 weeks. I think it's December 7th through the 21st. And he's got a bunch of different, very cool teachers that each have a different kind of unique perspective. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited to get in there with a beginner mind and meet this process of like merging sound with a lot of these visualization practices, because I think a lot of the students are more visually inclined. They're painters and illustrators for the most part. It's not mostly musicians. It's mostly people in the visual realm. So I was like thinking how I can merge that with the sound stuff and like where they meet and how to do practices. I'm thinking about it every day. So it's interesting you brought it up because it's one of those things where it's like I get very excited thinking about how I can participate and I've had a lot of ideas about doing these kinds of things more in the music side, like for young guitar players or something, or people trying to kind of find where their spiritual practice meets with their creative process and how to kind of, because we're all trying to point to the truth. That this is the whole point of art. It's like you're just trying to touch the unknowable and point at it. It's like, this is what we're all like the things that you can't say. It's like so it's like, oh, is there ways to kind of massage that? And I think there are. I think there's practical ways to get in there and to get better at accessing that state. I mean, for some people it's easier than others, but it is like anything else. It's a practice, and like people will say, like, oh, I don't like to, I'll reference something in astrology and they're like, I don't believe in astrology. And I'll say, I don't believe in astrology either. I practice it. It's not a belief system.
Right.
Meditation is not a belief system. It's a practice, Yoga is a practice. It's like, you got to take it out of the religion box or like this belief box and conceptual box and think, no, it's more about experiencing it directly and then arriving at our own, like even the Buddha himself said that, don't believe a word I say until you've arrived at this on your own terms through your own research. And that's really kind of the goal here is like, so if you can introduce some different practices and entry points for people to kind of access these states, what's funny about all this stuff is, and you probably know this, it's like maybe doing the podcast now, it's like we become the student all over again. It's like I'm psyched because I'm really the student here that's just sharing what I've learned to other students, but it's like I'm learning just as much as it's an interactive collective exchange. I don't claim to know anything. And the real point here is that we're all just like kind of in on this. There's no teacher. We're all reflecting, and every situation is different in that sense, like where you'll meet it and how the situation can unfold. and even a creative process. I'll just add this because you're reminding me of something, which is when I was in college, like, and I never finished college, but I had various iterations of times in college. And one time, the early years when I was really, Cynic was active and we were studying jazz and all this stuff, and I was in this big band, and I had auditioned this guy named Giorgini. He was like the infamous tough big band band leader guy. To get in his band was like a thing, and it was like he was just tough, classic Italian, like ball buster, like hard music teacher. Very kind of intimidating, and I was so scared. And I remember my teacher encouraging me, my guitar teacher, Dave, like, just audition, man. You got it. You're good, dude. And so I went in and he had me solo over something and read this chart, whatever, just to see if I could start doing gigs with this big band. And I was so nervous, so terrified. I remember literally shaking, like my hand was like, but I was like, I did the best I could, and I got in, and then once I got in and I got more confident and we started to do gigs and stuff, I was realizing, and this was like something that someone had said to me, it's like the curse of overstudying and over preparing is that you actually, now it's working against you because you feel so insecure. You know too much. You don't have that, like, it's like it's kept me in this state of feeling like I don't know enough, and I feel eternally insecure because I realize how profoundly deep this is. At the same time, I'm so prepared that I'm cool. It's fine. I got what it takes. I can do this. I can meet this in my own way, and constantly reminding myself that, like, there's no way to really prepare for any of this. I saw Jim Carrey, man. I worked with him on a children's book.
I saw that.
And dude, he talk about somebody who meets everything in the moment with absolute presence and no preparation. Like, granted, he's an anomalous being with insane, like, just empathic nature, who can absorb energy and mirror it back to you, like the way that he can do those embody people and stuff, all that shape shifting. But he really is, like, I remember when we went to, I had all the sound design stuff for the children's book, and it's like, we need the sound of a boat engine and the wind and the leaves rustling and, like, dolphins and this sound. It was just like, I had like a list of, like, 100 things, and I was going through like archival sound libraries trying to kind of sound design it. And he's like, when I went to home and show him the list, he's like, no, I want to do this. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And it's like, we got in the studio, put him in front of the mic, like this was in the studio, and he just goes through the list and starts embodying each sound with his mouth, like in the moment. And it was like no preparation, just saw it. And it's like complete trust that he had what it takes to just show up for what was in front of him and to meet it. And we always have what it takes. This is the thing, we all have what it takes. You know what I mean, man?
100%. Oh, yes. We all have what it takes.
We all have what it takes. So I find myself scrambling, writing down, making notes, thinking of all these ideas, preparing for this retreat. And of course, I'll come in over-prepared. The reality is I'll get there and I'm going to throw it all out the window, and it's going to happen. But this is, this is how it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to get to the point where you get past preparation and you just show up and trust that you have it, that you've done the work, and now is your opportunity to put it at work and to kind of. And that was the thing. I got to that point in that big band where I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can play like this, and And I had those moments in television music doing stuff where it was sound-alikes and doing sound-alike libraries where it was like, oh yeah, I can do this. It's like get little like nudges of feeling more secure or feel like you can fake it better, I guess, or something, It's like, I don't know. I mean, there's never, I think the most authentic place where we meet all this is just where it's just the most naked and real. And there's no pretense and no show and no just being completely vulnerable and real with where we are with all of it, and meeting it that way that feels like that's the only place that can really, you know what I mean, where it makes sense. Everything else is just a showboating nonsense.
Well put, well articulated. We all have what it takes.
By the way, again, recently, I don't know if you know this book.
Oh yeah, all right. I do not own a copy of it, but okay.
By the way, look at this bookmark. This is
oh, what is that?
In particular, can you see it's a little ET?
Oh, whoa.
3D thing,
That is fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, it's like a little 3D ET bookmark. It's so cool.
I love it.
This is like an old school technology, lenticulars, where they could print in 3D. But I feel like part of me is like, fuck, I want to make like an album cover with this. Probably someone did it, like some kind of envisioning of like, because it's just so rad, But this book is so deep, dude. It's so profound. Wow, it just gets into all the the whole geometry stuff, and just the solids and the roots of where the fruit of life goes to the seed of life, and combining, everything leading to Metatron's cube, and
yes,
so deep, and then the heart math of like the DNA molecule, which is like, I don't know if you know Dan Winter's stuff, but all that's Dan Winter's fucking man. He got into this whole thing. And what's fascinating is a lot of that is related to the tetrahedron, and the tetrahedron was adopted by, for example, its roots are ancient in Vedic culture, in Tibetan culture. You'll see this in 2D form, it looks like a 6-pointed star, but it's actually like 8. It's like a 3D shape, and but even the Jews adopted it as their symbol, the Star of David. And what it represents in all these ancient teachings is the heart chakra. It's the math of the heart, the vehicle, the Merkaba vehicle. So it's so deep, the science of it. You can become a scholar in this stuff, and we have them. The Dan Winters and the Drunvala Melchizedeks, they've written books about this stuff. I feel like this is all this stuff, I feel like I could study this the rest of my life, and just it's endlessly fascinating and deep, right? And where you connect the dots, and where it meets love, and there's the tree of life, and there's a whole even drawing of the tree of life on Atlantis, like showed it kind of was in the geometry of Atlantis. It's so cool, man. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's absolutely the stuff that I absolutely love too. I mean, are you familiar with David Ariel for Kabbalah? So
oh wow, yeah, I know that book, but I've never read that. Wow,
this one's a great read. Yeah, and so that's the closest book I have to within reach anyway. So yeah, just definitely with sacred geometry, Vedic text, so there's so much, like you said, like that interconnectedness, and I could relate when you were talking about like having the artwork for your album, and you're trying to show all the interconnectedness, and you're like, well, now I'm just going to subtract. I don't need to do all those things. It's right there. Like, I love that.
Yeah, I don't have to be so literal, right? It's like takes confidence to not be literal, but sometimes literal is in the wall, is in the tapestry, and because I think about like this most recent Cynic album, and it's not literal at all, but the guitars, it's so dense. There's so many secret things. And hearing this playthrough song I did of Aurora instrumentally, it's like, wow, it's like a different song. Because now because the vocal's out, all these other things come forward. So it's like you hear these details in the guitars and other instruments, including bass and drums, where it's like things emerge that you're just like, wow, I never heard that because I was listening to the vocal melody, you know,
Right.
where kind of the melody kind of took precedence. And this is interesting, the holographic aspect of how we listen to music too. It's like it can move and change. And Warren, who mixed the record, is really good about that. Like we did that with the growls. It was like this, we tried to do this. My friend Max Phelps did the vocals, and there, a lot of people were like, it sounds so subtle and quiet. But what's interesting is the way that it was mixed. It's like moving in a 3D space, like constantly. So at moments, it's actually really present. It almost could be on top of the vocoder, but then it kind of just drifts away and then it comes back in. So everything's moving like that all the time. So it's like, depending on where you are in your life, like the mix keeps evolving and stuff. And I love that because it gives the mix some meat where it feels like it lives,
Yes.
know what I mean? It transcends like the space of like a stereo image that we're relegated to.
Right.
Listening.
That was one of the first things I noticed too when I listened to the album. It was just this oscillation and this just like, it was just like, it was moving, it was living and breathing sound and frequency. And I was like, there's something clearly different about this. And I love it. Couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. So by the third or fourth listen, you start picking up on these subtle nuances and it's like, So.
Yeah. No, I love that too with like Warren. I could say to him things like I remember certain riffs and certain guitar parts of songs. I was like trying to articulate what I was going for. And it was like, I could only express it in abstract concepts. I couldn't be like, cut 60 hertz and boost this. And like, I can't think that way when I'm in a creative process. It just doesn't, my brain doesn't work that way. So I would say weird things and he understood it though, with the gift of that dynamic, right? Where you have someone who you're working with in a creative capacity who's interpreting all these tracks and trying to make sense of it and turn it into this 2D image essentially, or 3D image. And it's like when I can kind of say, I want it to be like this rather than this, and speak in weird geometrical, like I'll show them an image or something. It's like, this is what it should sound like, And but he could get that, and that's a beautiful, rare element, I think, of a mixer, because a lot of mixers are so technically inclined and so caught up in like mastering engineers. They're so like scientists in the realm of just, it's that fine line where it also can get over sterilized. And I've heard that in a lot of modern mixes with a lot of modern progressive music. It's hyper mixed to where there's too much separation, and it almost like feels like it's like mixed too well. Like it's like, no, like it's now I'm hearing everything too separated and it doesn't sound like one thing.
Right.
And that's a whole art form to get it to be one thing, rather than like sterilized, perfectly separated, hyper EQ'd mixes, which is like impressive when you've got fucking 60 to 80 tracks and 20, 30 guitar tracks and layers. But it does, I don't know, it can get hyper sterile, right? It's like we're still, at the end of the day, we're trying to create a sense of unity with all these instruments and this sound that's expressing one thing. And you get too surgical with EQing this to death, you might gut it. You might lose its body, and those imperfections that, could be called imperfections in those types of mixes become what makes it so special often. Those weird flaws, those errors, the things that are maybe too loud or too quiet. It's like, if it's done tastefully, it can be really special and, especially if you're conscious of it. It's pretty. A lot of those classic records have that. You can't put your finger on it. It's like, oh, it has that mysterious thing that.
And those tend to be the albums, in my opinion, that the more you listen, the more you discover, and they just keep growing, and they're like vessels in time, and like, oh, I love that.
Like, what are you? I'm guessing you have a super eclectic palette. Like, what'd you grow up listening to mostly?
Oh God, what didn't I? So with my mom, I mean, it was everything from soul and R&B and Elvis and Bob Marley and the Wailers to, I mean, anything like Tom Jones. And so it was like this, music was music, and my mom loved to dance. So I in turn loved to dance, and I loved music and rhythm. And I would pick up on all these different, sounds that just moved me, and I didn't know why, and I wanted to play music.
So you heard a lot. So like, sounds like super eclectic, but also 80s stuff too. Did you grow up on?
Yeah, a lot of 80s stuff, even like new wave.
Dancing and yeah,
a lot of fun stuff, late 70s stuff, and just like, getting into things, even just like some of, like, bands like, Creedence Clearwater, and Pink Floyd, and then bands like Yes, and getting into some of that stuff because I had uncles that were into things, or cousins. So it was just like this, like, ever expanding world of music. So
cool. Yeah, you ended up being familiar with the fringes, like bands like Cynic and stuff.
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's, to get down that road is so specific and weird, but it's like, but you got into heavier music and rock and metal and stuff too. And
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Cause my brother, he was into Black Sabbath and Ozzy and Metallica. So then that was that path. And then it was Queensryche, and, kind of getting down there. It's like, okay, I like this, and I like this, and just ever expansive, and like, then it's like, you think what metal is, and then it's like, oh, check this out. This is death metal, or this is tech death metal, and this is, and you're like, what? All these different subgenres that I didn't know about.
So deep. And then the black metal world. I mean,
right.
It's like its own, so many subs,
Right.
Yeah, I love it. It's all these expressions, we're so cool seeing it take all these forms. And I remember some old interview. I can't remember like what year this was, but I think it was someone like in Morbid Angel. It might have been David Vincent or something, but he said something to the effect like, there are no rules in these subgenres that we're making. And this is the beauty of it, is that we can do whatever we want, and we're not confined. We're not in any box, and so it's like limitless, realms of creative expression within these extreme art forms. And I was like, yeah, that's so cool. It's true. It's because we find these weird extremities, and then we're kind of finding niches within the extremities, like the black metal, which is fascinating. The folk scene.
Yes.
So cool, and merging like all these different, indigenous and you know what I mean, like, what was that band, Wolves in the Throne Room,
Yes.
Like kind of woods, but like Oregon, like a different vibe than like Norway.
Yes. Right.
One little weird niche that was kind of part of their scene, and
yeah, it's so fascinating how, geographically, the nuances can change, and the influence, and then, resurgence, and
No, it was. I just went last week to see Deicide on their 30th anniversary of Legion tour, and like, I kind of knew those guys as a kid. Like, I remember them being around the studio when we were making Death's Human, and they were kind of around. They were like this Florida band, but I always think about the anomalous nature of all of these bands that came out of that particular region, because we weren't part of that. We were the city kids from Miami. We were from like 3, 4 hours south of that part of Central Florida. But that all these bands came out with really strong voices and sounds that were so distinct from each other. You think of Death, Morbid Angel, Obituary, Deicide, like Nocturnus. It was like just all these weird, there was a lot of bands that just kind of didn't sound like, they all sounded like themselves. Atheist, of course. It was like, what happened there? How did that happen? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like so trippy, like especially because the kids in that region too, they weren't from cities that were exposed to like us, like cultural environments of different ethnicities. They were in these like pretty white, kind of almost like felt more Southern. I mean, those parts of Florida, especially back then, felt like the South, you know? So it's almost like just like, I mean, I'll put it bluntly, like for us, we'd go up there and we're like, these guys are hicks. They're fucking chewing tobacco and you know what I mean? Like, and sometimes in a not cool way, like racist kind of shit where it was, oh, that's a bit gnarly. That ain't cool. You know, we were like, I'm a Cuban kid, brown skinned in Miami. You know, it's like I was from a different world. But at the same time, you know, you get to the root and they're like, no, they're good people. Like it's not, I think it's unconscious cultural things that came from time and place. But really, if you get to know them, they're actually not racist. Maybe some. I'm not going to speak directly because I don't know. I only knew the ones I knew, but it was fascinating that this incredibly extreme these art forms were birthed out of those regions, and they each were so unique. And I always wondered, it was like, what was it? Like, was it in the water? Was it like, what was it that produced same generation? Sweden had it going on too. They had their kind of weird, more different version of it. Like I was more fond of the Florida scene, I guess, because not only having been from there, but just it felt more like, I don't know, there was just a different thing going on with the way that it was expressing itself. But I always wondered about that because I know there was a rebellious aspect because there was a lot of retirement communities there, elderly people, churches. Like that's kind of a lot of that Central Florida was big on that, especially at that time.
Right.
Maybe they were just, it was a rebellion against the boredom of that constipated, elderly, static religion where you just felt, and you know, the angst of youth, like just going, fuck you.
Right.
Do something different. So it pushed these edgy fucking extreme art forms, which were fucking sick, you know, so sick. Like, but yeah, I'm always curious about like, and I wonder if there's even like, you know, scientific, philosophical explanations of like how those things happen, those weird pockets of like emerging creative kind of explosions. Like you think of like Dadaism in Berlin or something, weird like creative movements that just happen in like a period, and maybe sometimes it's response to all, you know, outer events, the war, whatever was going on, World War II stuff. But I think in Florida, maybe it was related to, because there was a lot of the satanic, just rebellious, because of all of the retirements. But, you know, I'm just always curious about the layers of that. Like, where does this shit come from?
Cause and effect.
Yeah, because it was a lot of bands. There was a real scene, and everybody was writing their own, like, voice. And you know, and someone like Monty Connor shows up from Roadrunner and just starts signing all these different, like, parts of that. Like, it was really cool to see that. You know, that he had the insight to kind of spot these. And there was obviously different bursts of it that were popping out in other places around the world, but it was just curious, that pocket, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s in Florida. It was so trippy, you know, how I just remember having those moments. I remember being specifically, and I've told this story before, with Chuck Schuldiner at a party. It was like at a barn, fucking barn. And it was like every extreme band was playing, you know, like Deicide were still Amon, and Obituary were still Executioner. I mean, they were kids, and I remember Glenn fucking kicking over Virgin Mary statues from the top of the stage was really high. And I was there with Chuck. Chuck had just put out Spiritual Healing. And we were just hanging out. And I remember thinking, like, in that moment, because every band of the scene was there. And it was just like, wow, this is so trippy. Like, how there's this real scene. And it was a real moment, where it felt like there was a collective community. And it was so fringy and so extreme. But very cool and affirming to have those moments, especially when you're so outside. For us, we were so outside and felt so weird as artists, and like didn't feel connected to anybody other than these little moments of like, oh yeah, there's other freaks like us, weird shit, making weird music. But I don't even think we even understood it. We were just showing up for a process, trying to process and capture and communicate something that even we didn't perhaps understand. It was just coming through. It's like so young. I mean, early 20s, late teens. Yeah, it's interesting, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing how it just
died at 34. He was 34 years old. People don't realize that. Like, yeah, he was a kid.
Yeah. You've had so many different experiences in life, music, and just culturally, aesthetically. Like there's so much, and you express it in your art, and it's so unique. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks, George. I appreciate you reaching out and being here and having a moment with you.
Right on. Well,
yeah,
it's one of those things where it makes sense.
I'm glad. Thank you I really am glad we had it. Let's do it again sometime.
Oh, I would love that. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Where can folks find you on the internet?
The usual channels. I think that Instagram, and Cynic has a Facebook. My Facebook isn't active right now because I don't exist to them. They literally froze my account, said I had to prove my identity.
Oh.
This is a funny metaphor. I uploaded my passport, my driver's license, a state ID thing, and they're like, not good enough. And I'm like, okay, I guess I don't exist.
What?
I know. So it's like a verified account kind of thing. So it just came out of nowhere where it suddenly was like, it's been 2 months where I can't post anything on my personal account.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll see. A part of me is just like, maybe it's time to shut that one down and just keep it Cynic, simplify it. But yeah, we have all the socials, Cynic Online generally is the name for the sites. And I think that's about it. Yeah, and just my own name, but yeah, and in the ether. And
right. And can folks still register for that retreat in Bali in December? Is there?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. We should look that up and double check. But
okay.
Yeah, it might be closed now. I have to double check. I know it was offering something. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh, no sweat.
And so wait, you're JC, right?
Yeah, I'm Jay, and George is my good friend and producer. Yeah.
And short for Jason?
It is.
Cool.
Yeah. Goes back to my mom again. So when my brother was born, he came out, and it was a boy. She remembered how she carried him. 6 years later, I'm coming around, and she was convinced. She's like, oh, it's a girl. Because back then they didn't really get the sex. It was just like, whatever, I'm going to ride it out, and it's going to be a surprise. She was totally convinced I was going to be a girl. And she had a different name picked out. And then when I was born, they said, okay, well, you have another son. She said, wait, really? And so she didn't have a name. So for 24 hours, my name was the letter J, because when my mom was born, my grandmother didn't have a middle name picked out for my mother. So just had her middle name was just the letter J. So my mom used the letter J for me until she came up with a name. And the doctor said, all right, getting ready to discharge her. Do you have a name? She said, well, yeah, he's my son. So Jason. Went with Jason. But for 24 hours, it was the letter J. And all the birthday cards and everything, my mom, there's always the letter J, and so, yeah. So
it could have been Jennifer. It could have been.
Yeah, it was my girl, the name that she picked out for me was Crystal.
Crystal, interesting.
I was going to be Crystal. Yeah. So there you go. A little Crystal Gale action. I don't know. But yeah.
So you've always gone by JC kind of, or?
Yeah, friends call me JC.
Is the C for Crystal, or is it just?
No, it's for my last name, which is Costa.
Oh, Costa, right? Okay.
Yeah, or in Azorian or Portuguese, Costa. So when I'm first generation in this country, my individually, like, parents came here. My father immigrated here when he was a child. So and he actually didn't become a citizen until after I was born. So both my brother and myself were born. Then he became a citizen. So
there's a whole Portuguese contingent in Mass, right? That kind of is there, because I think of my dear friend Amy, who's from Lakeville, and her
Correa,
yeah.
Oh my, she's from Lakeville.
She's from Lakeville.
Oh my gosh, get out of here. That's so funny. I grew up with Correas because I'm, being Azorian and Portuguese. It's like,
yeah,
that's so funny.
Yeah, she's got the whole Portuguese bloodline full on, and Boston girl. Yeah. So
yeah.
Okay, so you guys, that's awesome.
That's hilarious. I got the tingles. That's so funny. Wow. Like, yeah, that's exactly it. And so here in Massachusetts is a lot of Portuguese immigrants and immigrants from the Azores that came over, and like my father was born in San Miguel, and
Wow.
Yeah, so fast, small world.
Yeah, it is a small world. Have you been to Portugal yet, or?
I have not. When I toured throughout Europe, we didn't do Spain or Portugal. I haven't been to the Azores. We did mostly Germany, France, Italy, Austria, but we didn't do the Iberian Peninsula at all, as it was once known.
It's a special place, man. It's really beautiful. Portugal is an incredible country. Definitely, that whole region is amazing. A lot of people in the U.S. have moved there because it's so artist friendly and easy in terms of a European place like Lisbon and stuff. And
right,
yeah, just one of those pretty magical places. We've been there many times, and actually, the last time I was there was in March of 2020. I was doing acoustic dates and promoting the Mythical Human Vessel stuff, and on a little tour there. And with some other bands, and the tour got canceled 5 shows in because of 2020, but it got canceled in Lisbon right after the Lisbon show. So I was like, let's hang out in Lisbon for a minute, we did the driver, or the guy who was tour managing and driving for us, my friend Marcus. We just decided to hang and kind of have a moment, which was so cool. It's such a special city.
Oh, yeah, I need to visit Portugal for a lot of reasons. I want to just a lot of the art, the culture, the food. While it's especially with my family, like I don't eat meat, and I haven't eaten meat in so long. So like for a lot in Portuguese culture, there's a lot of meat and things like that, but there's also a lot of vegetables and things like that. So yeah,
it's gotten better. The whole movement, the vegetarian movement is like, it's impressive to see how it's kind of entered even small towns in Europe, and like and I feel like it's the millennial generation that's really kind of brought it out in terms of in the voice of the community. Like, as they're the ones opening the little restaurants and trying to kind of build businesses around it, and but yeah, it's definitely a lot easier in Europe now than it was, and it's finally not taboo to say you don't eat meat. Like, it used to be like, what,
Yeah.
like how, what do you eat then? Like, how do you do this? But now it's like kind of common and accepted, which is really cool. It shows how far we've come with that.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, even back in 2009, that's when we had toured throughout Europe. We were on tour with Earth Crisis, who were, they're vegans. And like, so it was like, if we hadn't been on tour with them, like, I don't know, like in the States, back in like the mid 2000s, some of the promoters, their idea of me, not eating meat was like, all right, here's some breadsticks and a salad. And I was grateful. I was very, very grateful, but, things have changed so much and it's so much better now.
Better. I remember stretches in Europe back in the 90s, early 90s, where I was on like bread and cheese and I had to eat some dairy, and I was always lactose intolerant. So it was painful, you know what I mean? But yeah, so it was like, fuck. But I was like, bread and cheese sandwiches and shit, like for fucking throughout Germany, stretches of like, it was like, because there was just it was all fucking schnitzel and meat stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I got really skinny. Oh, real. I don't know if you were like, you went through that, just being, but it was just like, yeah, not eating as much, which is a whole other conversation. Yeah,
right. I do. I mean, I'm all about intermittent fasting. I'm all about it. So
that's cool. Yeah.
It's been fascinating. So I can.
Yeah, we got to talk more. We have more for sure.
Yes, we'll absolutely have to do this again.
Yeah, that'd be nice. And let's keep in touch. And maybe I'll see you on the road sometime.
That'd be awesome. We haven't been touring nearly as much. We haven't done much in a while. Our drummer, he had cardiac arrest back in 2015, and we had to slow down significantly. And while he's thankfully better, we don't push ourselves, and just for us and what we were doing, it's not lucrative. It's fun for us to go overseas though. When we do Japan, we love it there. We love Europe, and in the States, we've slowed down a little bit and had some lineup changes, but I still love it.
Yeah. You almost have to just do it for the sheer love of it rather than seeing it as a monetizing.
Right.
Just like traveling with some homies and some cool places and doing some gigs and right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And meet people and take it all in, share that energy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Paul, thank you so very much for doing this today.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, brother.
Nice to meet you. Well, I look forward to doing this again soon.
Yes, I do too.
All right. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
We're gonna put a comma at the end of this, not a period. There's a comma because our conversation will continue. And there you have it. I cannot express how much I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Paul. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your space, Paul. You can find Paul Masvidal on Instagram at Paul Masvidal. That's PaulMasvidal. You can also find Paul on the internet at listen.masvidalian, Masvidalien.com. We talked about so much. We talked about the Bali Art Magic Retreat in December, where Paul's friend Jake has really visioneered an eclectic mix of esoteric magicians and individuals to really create a unique experience. So that's going to be in Bali in December. We talked about Cynic's Ascension Codes, which is sincerely one of my favorite releases of 2021. And if you have not heard that yet, I would implore each and every one of you to check that out. Paul shared so many personal stories with me and I with him. These are the kinds of conversations that I absolutely love and adore about this podcast. If you're watching this, we hope you take a moment and subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and be sure to like this episode. If you're listening to this episode we hope you take a moment and rate it. We're still a new podcast, so by you rating it, you're helping us reach more listeners and viewers. So thank you. And until next time, please take care of one another and keep thinking for yourself.